Hello, friends and adventurers. Our podcast has been supported for months now by Misty Mountain Gaming, and they're now rewarding you, our listeners, with savings on all their fine D&D products such as metal dice, stone dice, glass dice, miniatures, adventures, dice trays, and more. You can use the code TWINS10, that's TWINS10, to save 10% on all purchases made in their online store at mistymountaingaming.com. Every code redeemed helps support Steven and I, and encourages us to make more and better content for you. So be sure to use code TWINS10 whenever you're buying premium Dungeons & Dragons dice and gear from our good friends at mistymountaingaming.com. Okay, on with the show.
All right, well, it is time. We have finished 20th level. Let's go all the way back to first and talk about this cornerstone of what makes a druid.
Which, let's go ahead and address that before we get into it. Clearly, given the brevity of the last several minutes going through the different class features that didn't have to do anything with Wild Shape is the pillar on which the druid is built. And I'm just going to play devil's advocate and say that I'm not sure that is appropriate. I like the druid as this mystic character, this shaman of the woodlands. I don't need them to be a shapeshifter. I don't mind that it's an option, but it is clearly all that was on Wizards of the Coast mind when they designed this class, let alone the subclass that is meant to improve upon it.
Out of all of the class features that a base druid gets, not even talking about Circle of the Moon here, out of all 11 of them, one of them gives you Wild Shape, 7 of them modify Wild Shape. If it wasn't the cornerstone of what makes a druid in 5th edition, it certainly is now. I agree that I would like to see a little bit more diversity within the druid. Now, the fact that you can change into pretty much whatever kind of animal you want is awesome. And they really give you a lot of different ways to implement that. But there's also a lot of the ways that they made it kind of sameier.
Yeah, see, that's the thing. If you take away this one aspect of the class,
there's just so little left.
I don't feel like you have anything left. Like paladins, as we're going to see, have their smite, but they have their auras. You have channel divinity on the clerics, but you also have the radiant strikes and other ways to employ your divine power. Rogues get sneak attack, but they're also skill monkeys. Rangers can turn themselves freaking invisible, but they're not just one-trick ponies. They have made this druid basically into a one-trick pony.
Which is funny because the druid could actually become a pony.
That's fair. You have your spells, yes, but how much are we really planning to lean on those to give druids a little bit more identity? Because right now it looks like every druid is going to kind of be the same. They're going to be able to do this one thing. And I would rather see the subclass be used to make Wild Shape a bigger part of the class than to double down on something that you're already kind of doing anyway. But you're lacking context for all of these things I'm saying until we actually get into the features.
To be fair, one could say the same thing about a 5th edition wizard, right? Because, I mean, they're basically their spell book, except for their subclass features. They don't get a whole lot more than that. And yet, wizards can be extremely diverse. But I should clarify that I do completely agree with your sentiment about the One D&D Druid, and agreeing with that sentiment is one of the reasons that I haven't played a lot of wizards. You know, if you are looking to your subclass to give you an additional identity outside of Wild Shape, remember that your subclass as a druid is only going to give you a total of 4 features. So you're still getting a total of 8 features that grant and modify Wild Shape, and at most another 4 that don't.
All right, we have kept you waiting more than long enough. Let's talk Wild Shape. As early as first level in 1D&D, you can use your channel nature as a magic action to assume a bestial form. This form is going to last until you are incapacitated, until your timer runs out, which would be a number of hours equal to half your druid level, or until you're dead, or ended as a bonus action. Now, while you're in this Wild Shape, you lose access to all your other features of being a druid. And there is some ambiguity there as to if anything is left, because unlike in 5th edition, they have moved where the word features begins when you are looking at all the things that your class gains. For instance, your skill proficiencies and saving throw proficiencies and tool proficiencies are before the word features appears in this playtest content, leaving some room that maybe you would retain those even in your Wild Shape.
While the formatting of the class features does leave the door open for the fact that this might be unintentional or possibly not even the case, the prevailing opinion right now goes back to 5th edition, where things like skill proficiencies and the all-important saving throw proficiencies are counted as race and class features. If they do intend for you to keep those in 1D&D, it seems like they would have specified that somewhere in this little stat block. And for all the things that they do list that you retain, they do not mention those. So my opinion of the coming stat blocks that we're going to be discussing for your different Wild Shape options will be impacted heavily by the answer to that slightly nebulous question.
Yes, and we are about to be mentioning some stat blocks as they are listed further on in the feature, and I can definitely see where the argument is made that since it is not specifically mentioned, because they do specifically mention so many things that you do retain, that saving throws and skill proficiencies may not be in the conversation here. But, to soften that blow, hey, your Wild Shape can talk now. Isn't that nice? You can still communicate and roleplay with your party. Boy, isn't that almost as good as having a saving throw proficiency? Golly, I think so.
Well, let's compare this to the 5th edition Wild Shapes, shall we? When you changed in 5th edition, it was not to a predetermined stat block. You could select from any beast who met certain requirements, and those requirements would kind of loosen up a little bit as you leveled, but you would replace your hit points with the beast's hit points while you were assuming their shape. You would gain their skills and proficiencies, their senses,
their attacks, their multi-attacks,
all of the features that made them unique. You would even gain, I believe you would gain their ability scores, wouldn't you?
You absolutely would. Basically, you became that creature. Now, you did retain your mental ability scores, so you didn't get any dumber because you became a squirrel. But you would not be able to act and interact with the world physically in a way that a creature of that type could not.
Yeah, see, here I'm looking at the 5th edition rules again, and it says specifically you also retain all of your skills and saving throw proficiencies in addition to gaining those of the creature, and it just doesn't say anything even remotely similar to that in 1D&D.
And this is kind of what made Wild Shape in 5th edition a bit of a problem, frankly. As Steve said, this required you not just to know your character sheet and your spells and your class features, but it required you to know a plethora of different beasts. It required you to understand challenge ratings, or at least be able to have them top of mind. It required you to know the different capabilities of a bunch of different animals, and if you ever got them wrong, oh boy, did it mess up the moment and the dungeon master and the player and the character and the scene, and it was just a lot to have to keep up with. It was intimidating, it was clunky, it was slow. And in the name of changing that and streamlining that, now we have 3 options for the Wild Shape and 3 options only. Now, they can look like whatever your little old heart desires. They can look like an owlbear for all that we care. But they are going to have one of 3 predetermined stat blocks. Those being Animal of the Land, Animal of the Sea, and Animal of the Sky. And they are going to be unlocked at different levels as you progress on your druidic journey.
All right, so let's talk about the one that you start out with access to, which is the Animal of the Land. It starts out with an armor class equal to 10 plus your wisdom modifier. Depending on how you built your druid, this could be an improvement. It's probably going to be pretty close to what you can expect to have with light armor and your dexterity modifier and a shield. So we're probably in the same ballpark.
Regardless, it's probably better than what most of the animals you could change into were.
True.
With their unarmored selves and lack of natural armor.
Because you're a super animal.
So we're not only comparing these stat blocks to you as a normal druid, whether or not you would want to spend a use of wild shape, but also to kind of the general concept of other animals you could turn into in 5e.
The biggest... Is this the biggest? I feel like this is the biggest change.
It's the biggest to me.
With the new version of your wild shape options is that all of them, currently being discussed, animal of the land included, do not change your hit points or hit dice at all. Whatever your hit points are going in are your hit points once you get there.
Controversial opinion time?
Yes, go ahead.
Hallelujah. I mean, come on. The fact that you could use wild shape, you could be a 1 hit point druid on your last legs, coughing up blood and looking at your own disemboweled spleen, and then you could turn into a gorilla with all of its hit points. And at 20th level, you could do it as often as you wanted. That needed to be reined in. It was so freaking broken. It was oh so difficult to kill a druid in 5th edition because of how they decided that, and suddenly you turn into another creature that's at perfect health, no matter what kind of shape you were beforehand. It was too much. It was too much.
DM, as an action, I would like to gain 136 hit points and become a Tyrannosaurus.
I mean...
Could I please also borrow 4 of your D12s for one of my 2 basic attacks that I can use every turn?
Oh man, we haven't done, stupid voices since we've stopped doing the cool intros.
I'm glad that you thought they were cool.
I really enjoyed them.
Hey, guys, if you really liked the intros, let us know, because those bygone eras of our first year as a podcast were fun but hard to make.
And we could put that effort back in again if you continue to be understanding about our already inconsistent release dates. Now, I'm not sure that this was necessarily the step that was needed to make your wild shape not affect your hit points at all. Maybe some kind of a temporary hit point situation whenever you initially take the shape may be more appropriate. I'm not sure that I love that they don't have it affect your defenses at all, especially when it looks like you're kind of taking a more vulnerable form without the defense of your spells or your shield. Having your hit points be entirely unaffected in this form makes me feel vulnerable.
This is just very much in keeping with the removal of the druid from being a frontliner. They came for our armor, and now they're coming for our animal hit points. And by our, I mean, you guys who would actually play druids.
That said, they try and make it attractive from there on in certain ways. Your movement speed is 40 feet. That is faster than many things you could have turned into at early levels. And remember, you're getting this as soon as level 1. You're not even having to wait till level 2 to be able to be faster than the party monk. You're also going to be able to get dark vision of 60 feet, which is as much as your summoned familiar is going to be at 2nd level, if you didn't already have that from your race.
Which, let's be honest, you probably did.
But you're going to be able to keep it in your animal form, which you might have lost it before.
Now, here's a fun thing that happens. This is the only thing that I think is an interesting improvement from just taking your beast stats. I don't think it'll necessarily always be an improvement, but, maybe we'll see. When you transform into an animal of the land, and as we'll see later, the other animals as well, your mental ability scores are going to stay the same, just like they used to in 5th edition. Your constitution is also going to stay the same, unlike in 5th edition. And your strength and dexterity scores are both going to be changed to equal your wisdom score. Let's be honest, as a druid, that's going to be a strict improvement. If your wisdom score wasn't naturally already going to be higher than the others, you're certainly going to want to pump it as high as you can, as quick as you can, in order to take advantage of this little change.
Your wisdom modifier is now not only affecting how good your healing blossoms are, which we unlock at 2nd level as you'll recall.
Your spell attack bonus, your spell save DC.
But now it's going to be affecting your physical stats in your wild shape. In fact, when we get down to the attacks in Wild Shape, they are literally going to use your spell attack modifier. Wisdom is the primary ability score for a druid, and for good reason. Few classes get as much mileage out of their primary ability score as the druid is about to get out of wisdom.
The only thing holding us back from talking about the aforementioned attack action is the Keen Senses feature, which states that you have advantage on perception checks, or at least wisdom perception checks.
Hey, look, there's wisdom being useful again. And it is a pretty common trait that shows up in a lot of the land animals that you might have turned into in 5th edition, so the ability to keep it, top notch. Let's move on from there to your Bestial Strike. Rather than turning into a creature that has its own list of attacks, as you did in 5th edition, sometimes more than one, you get one attack. When you get the ability at first level to turn into your particular flavor of Animal of the Land. It uses your spell attack modifier, is a melee attack, and deals a d8 plus your wisdom modifier of some type of mundane damage, bludgeoning, piercing, or slashing. This is longsword damage. It's flexing your wisdom ability score in ways previously only accessible to a warlock hexblade and its charisma. So, I mean, that's pretty good. And the fact that you can't just out the gate turn into something that is getting more attacks than the rest of the party and more hit points than the rest of the party, or extra hit points compared to the rest of the party, I think is a nice balancing act. And again, makes your wisdom look pretty attractive.
Yeah, I can agree that that is a fun little improvement, and you're probably going to be doing a lot more damage with your Wild Shape at early levels than you would back in 5th edition. So I agree that that part of the balancing act was done well. Now let's talk about where the balancing act fell short, okay? There are a lot of things that we lost moving from 5th edition to this system. Before we go into all of this, I think that Rob and I can both agree that things needed to be simplified.
Yes.
These stat blocks have been kind of teased with a bunch of different class features in the more recent books from 5th edition, and certainly in the playtest material we have seen precedent for this sort of thing. So we all saw this coming, and I agree that this is the right approach to take. But I am among the readers out there, among the players, among the Dungeon Masters who thinks that maybe this might have gone a little bit too far. So comparing this to its 5th edition counterpart, starting at first level, which again, that's good. You get it at first level instead of second level. You can already turn into any animal that you want between the small and large creature sizes. It doesn't matter what CR it is, because we really don't care about the stats of that creature. We're basing them off of the Wild Shape Druid stat blocks. Whether or not we are losing, in exchange for this, all of our skills and all of our proficiencies, we are certainly losing all of our class features and all of our racial features. We're losing the HP that we temporarily have access to by virtue of changing into these creatures. We are losing the unique features that some of these beasts would have afforded us, things like, pack tactics. You could get fairly early on as, say, a wolf. And we're losing the ability to pick up the skills and saving throws and proficiencies of the thing we're turning into, because the thing that we're turning into is a flat stat block that is loosely based off of us. That feels like the attempt at rebalancing was resoundingly successful, perhaps overly so. The only perk that we get in exchange is the strength and dexterity modification. That's probably going to increase those stats. And the fact that you can now wild shape into an owlbear like that girl in the movie. It's not going to actually be an owlbear, but it could look like an owlbear. And way back as a level 2 druid in 5th edition, you could shapeshift into a tiny creature. You could use that very often mentioned druid turns into a spider and explores the whole dungeon exploit. We will get that back, but it's going to be a long time from now. Which, arguably, in fact, possibly definitively, it should be, but the hits just keep coming with this new wild shape feature.
Yeah, if you were a druid main and you loved looking down on the other classes and laughing, then that is gone. But let me play devil's advocate for a second here. Looking at this stat block, you have made a single heavily prioritized ability score good for your armor class, 2/3 of your physical ability scores. You have made it good for your attacks. You have made it good for your damage. You have increased your movement speed beyond the norm. This is definitely a step down from the old Druid in a lot of ways, even though I continue to remind you you're getting access to it earlier. But compared to another level 3 character, a D8 is longsword damage, and you're getting to do it, and you're using a mental ability score to attack with it. You're getting free dark vision if you didn't get it before. You're moving faster than a monk at this level. This is not a bad ability. It's just not as good as where we've been. Remember, this is a level 1 feature. It's not meant to break the game, and it's getting better all the time as you go through the progression with this class. This is as bad as it gets. Literally, this is as bad as it gets.
Yeah, I concede that there are some possible improvements when you compare this to certain options that you could have had in 5th edition. The fact that they're smoothing those out is nice, like you get keen senses and dark vision across the board. I just can't help but feel like this needle has been moved too far in the wrong direction. Like
level 1, Steve. The monk doesn't even have key points yet.
At level 1, this does feel pretty good. I'll give you that. But beyond level 1, I start to lose the identity of where Wild Shape is supposed to be used. Because I feel like using these stats, a Druid could be almost, if not more effective than this, as a Druid, as a non-wild shaped Druid. That will begin to have its ups and downs as we continually add the remaining 7 features onto this.
Yeah, let's go through and find the point where you think that we jump the shark.
Is it when you become the shark?
Let's find out. We're going to stick with the normal Druid and come back to the Circle of the Moon in a bit. Because when we jump to level 5 and get Might of the Land, it is a strict improvement on our Animal of the Land. We unlock 2 features of that stat block that were previously level locked. And remember, by this time, we've had the opportunity at level 4 to take a feat and potentially improve that wisdom modifier, which will improve our attack, our damage, our armor class, our strength, our dexterity, and our hit points will have improved by the time we get here. So, we also unlock a climb speed equal to our movement speed. 40 feet of climb speed. Pretty dang impressive, I must say. Very few things that I can think of off the top of my head getting a 40-foot climb speed. And the ability to multi-attack. At the same time that every other class out there is unlocking their second attack, the Druid in its wild shape does too.
I do like the fact that on these multi-attacks, these bestial strikes, you do get to select what type of damage you're dealing every time. So as an Animal of the Land, you can opt between bludgeoning, piercing, or slashing every attack, regardless of your form. There are very, 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 very few creatures in D&D that have vulnerabilities, but you can seek them out. There are many more creatures that have damage resistances, and you can avoid those. At least where mundane physical damage is concerned.
So remember, at 5th level here, we are also unlocking iconic 3rd level spells. When the wizard is casting Fireball, the Druid is unlocking similar magics. But if they decide to go into the wild shape, they're not falling behind the damage output offered by martial classes who are unlocking that second attack. They're not getting one or the other, they are kinda getting both.
The next baseline druidic feature that is going to apply to Wild Shape comes in at 7th level, and it is called Aquatic Form. This will add the Animal of the Sea Wild Shape option to your pre-existing Animal of the Land option. I'm going to save you some time because they are fairly similar. I'm only going to highlight the differences. First, your strength score is no longer scaled to your wisdom score, only your dexterity. Your speed is going to reduce to 20 feet on land, but you're going to gain a swim speed of 40 feet, meaning that all animals of the sea are amphibious in that way. Oh, by the way, did I mention they're amphibious? You can breathe both air and water, regardless of whatever form you take. You can be a shark that decides to hop out of the ocean, crawl along the sand at 20 feet per round, and breathe air just fine.
Or, better yet, the Animal of the Sea gives you the option to turn into a small, medium, or large, aquatic, or semi-aquatic animal, giving you the option to be a semi-aquatic, egg-laying mammal of action. He's Perry. Bury the platypus.
Patty the platypus?
I want to be a large or small platypus in a fedora in a D&D game. That would make my dreams come true.
No, there you go. Right, and that's something that you can do in One D&D because the animal is made up and the size don't matter. Additionally, your dark vision is going to increase all the way up to 90 feet, where it previously had only rested at 60. You are going to immediately unlock the ability to have a multi-attack to make 2 bestial strikes. The difference is that as an animal of the sea, instead of dealing a 1d8 plus wisdom modifier physical damage, it's going to scale down to a 1d6.
Here, when you're not in your bestial form, you're casting 4th level spells. And we're starting to get into like serious spellcaster territory from this point on. So I will throw this out there. If you are in a campaign where water is featured, and I have been in campaigns, like entire stories where we didn't come across so much as a creek, this is going to make you sad. And you are going to be really happy that you have that spellcasting ability.
If your DM's like Rob and tends to avoid water combats, you might be disappointed with this feature.
It's also a little slow on unlocking creatures with the swim speed because in 5th edition, that was available to you at level 4.
Like I said, the hits keep coming.
So I know I was just saying, like, let's find the point where I stopped getting as excited about the wild shapes. Unfortunately, I think at 7th level, it's kind of already here. Because unless I need to swim, I'm not turning into this.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a roller coaster. It does get better later on, and if you are a Circle of the Moon Druid, you've already started to dip your toes into features that are going to make this a lot more palatable. But for all of the baseline Druids, who again are counting on their subclass features to give them a little bit of individuality, gloom, despair, and agony on them.
Let's move from there to 9th level, and if you have been sensing a trend, you know that there's only one different form to unlock, and here it is at 9th level, joining your access to 5th level spells. Does aerial form pull it back?
Let's take a look and find out.
If you like armor class, we ain't got armor class.
The difference between this and the aforementioned animal types is that immediately we're going to find that your armor class is reduced from 10 plus your wisdom modifier to a mere 8 plus your wisdom modifier. Normally when you have like speedy little flying animals, sometimes they get to keep a pretty decent AC owing to their speed. Not so much here. You're going to keep the 20 feet base movement speed that you had as an animal of the sea, and you're going to add to that a flying speed of 40 feet, just like you'd expect. Also similar to Animal of the Sea, your strength is no longer modified by your wisdom score. It is only your dexterity that changes to equal your wisdom score. All of your other stats are going to stay the same as in your normal druidic form.
Yo, dog, I heard you like dark vision. If 60 feet wasn't enough on that land animal, if 90 feet wasn't enough with that sea animal, baby, I got you 120 feet of dark vision. Seeing in the dark power is maxed out just for you. And that is as good as it's going to get.
Hey, I heard you like dark vision. So we've got added dark vision on your dark vision. Because it's literally, twice the distance that a humanoid race would be able to achieve.
Speaking of that animal of the land, keen senses making a comeback. You get advantage on perception checks again. You also get the flyby ability that you see a lot of aerial beasts get in 5th edition. You don't provoke opportunity attacks when you leave an enemy's reach while you're flying. Pretty groovy, and a nice little reward and an incentive when the bestial strike for the animal of the sky is the wimpiest of the bunch.
Yeah, flyby is really the only feature that I think is particularly unique and fun. Even looking at Animal of the Land and Animal of the Sea, flyby is always fun when you get to use it as a dungeon master. And hey, look, here's a way for you to get it as a player character. It does offset slightly, it might be insufficiently, the disappointment of having a mere D4 plus wisdom modifier physical damage on your bestial strikes. Even though you do get to make 2 of them, it's about half the average damage that you had as an Animal of the Land.
Let's compare to 5th edition real quick. As a 5th edition druid, you would get access to flying creatures at level 8 instead of level 9, which is, better than level 7 and 4 with the aquatic animals.
It's still slower, but the disparity is decreased.
In a turn, as an animal of the sky in 1D&D, you can deal 2d4 plus your wisdom modifier with your 2 bestial strikes combined. In 5th edition D&D, you could be a giant eagle, which could offer a total of 3d6 plus 6 if both of its attacks hit on a turn. That is definitely a damage nerf. It's also a speed nerf because giant eagles can fly at 80 feet on a move instead of 40. Dark vision notwithstanding, that is still a cool thing that your Animal of the Sky will get. Giant eagles didn't get flyby, but here at kind of the end of the mid-levels, where a lot of D&D campaigns are going to be taking place, let's be honest, this is not as good. I'm still probably more excited to be turning into the Animal of the Land when it comes to combat situations, which leads me to believe that Wild Shape is not meant any longer for combat applications. This is not meant to be how you solve enemies being around, like it was in 5th edition. Again, you're not the frontliner anymore. You're not the tank anymore. And I would argue that's not really the Druid's job. It's not what it's supposed to be. But you really can't do it with these 3 stat blocks that we've been presented with. Animal of the Land gets a little bit higher armor class and a little bit more damage, but you're really only turning into the Animal of the Sea if you have some aquatic exploration to do. You're really only turning into the Animal of the Sky if you have some scouting to do, when you need to get places that other characters and other creatures can't, and when you need plenty of vision and perception going on. The flyby almost even doesn't come into play because I'm not turning into an Animal of the Sky if I need something dead.
Yeah, I had that in my notes as well, which I'm not even sure if you read my notes or not, but I definitely did make... Or did you read my notes?
Of course. Of course I read your... Why would I not read your... Moving on.
Well, anyway, okay, so we both came to that idea independently is what I suspected and turns out to be true. This doesn't feel like a combat feature anymore. You did convince me that, there at the first couple of levels or so, that Animal of the Land could be competitive. Although so is casting the cantrip Shillelagh.
Yeah, which is a good point you brought up. That is, yeah.
I was struggling to discover where this was supposed to be used because they took away the ability to be tiny. It's not a great infiltration feature anymore. The combat stats aren't there. Even just the reduction of the armor class and the removal of the additional HP pretty much solidified that for me. I know that it's not going to be useful in most social situations because...
unless you just want pets for being a good boy.
Yeah. I don't even know what you would do in a social situation, but most social situations require skills, and you might not have any this way.
That's a good point.
But you did remind me that pure exploration does exist, like overland exploration. And I think that is where Wild Shape is going to shine. It's in your ability to traverse difficult environments more quickly than the rest of your party, to be able to scout ahead, to get additional information, and then be able to come back and use your ability to speak with your party that you have now as these animals to communicate what's ahead. Now, it's not a foolproof solution like in a dungeon or when you're trying to infiltrate a castle or things like that, but overland, or, I guess oversea.
Or overland, like in the air.
Yeah.
I'm doing a hand motion
to imply altitude. Yes, he is. They did leave all of the features that you need for that. But this is a lot of features to just make you better at exploration. Like, come on, give me a little something here,
No, Steve, it's nerf or nothing.
When we get to talking about Circle of the Moon, which is coming up, promise, we're going to see a couple of things that do make these wild shapes a little bit more combat viable. That's pretty much the entire intent of the Circle of the Moon. I would like to see potentially some of those cross over into the normal wild shape, just to make it to where you're not taking an active detriment to use these in combat. Like, it should be at least as good as a baseline druid.
I'm serious about the temporary hit points thing. Just like if I got a D10 plus con temporary hit points when I took on a wild shape, I'd be happy. Like, that would put me back in the combat conversation. I would take the damage output hit if I could go far enough in my form to be able to do whatever it is I was trying to do.
You know, I'm glad that you've got ideas, because this is admittedly the part of the design process that I don't think has a particularly easy answer. The wild shape in 5th edition was so busted in so many ways that it needed desperately to be reined in, and it needed to be simplified, and doing both of those two things at once, it has to be very difficult. I like the intent of what they're doing. They've made a lot of good decisions, but were I to play a Druid, I would most likely stay a Druid, and I would most likely feel bad that so many of my class features were wrapped up in something that is not often advantageous.
And I share those feelings, which is why I said the things I said a while ago. I think maybe an hour ago. This episode is going long. This is probably our longest BT episode. By the time we get to the end of it, we'll see.
It might be. It depends on how much of this stuff we keep, but I think we've been doing pretty good. Like, you know, we've been doing pretty good talking D&D.
Yeah, there's no 30-minute sections that I'm going to be able to pull. But hey, you talked about infiltration. You've said that several times throughout this episode. You talked about mapping out a dungeon and whatnot. Finally, at 11th level, that ability comes in, and it comes in as Tiny Critter. As any of the animals that you can shift into with your wild shape using the Channel Nature feature, let's not forget, you can finally gain the ability to become a tiny creature, not just small, medium, or large. If you use that feature, you can't stay in there very long compared to the other wild shapes. It's not measured in hours, it's measured in minutes, and no longer than 10. But if you want to become a spider, or a hornet, or a fly, then you can do that. Also, it doesn't affect any of your ability scores. It just affects the damage that you deal, which is halved. Which means I can deal half of a d8 plus half of my wisdom modifier on a spider bite, which I feel is hilarious.
You know, I think at some point earlier on in this episode, I erroneously said that you couldn't turn into a spider and go scout out the dungeon. You could do that. It'd just be a big-ass spider.
You know what? That's fair. But you can turn into a tiny spider at 11th level.
Turn into a tiny elephant at 11th level and go scout out the dungeon.
I hate that idea. I'm going to pretend you didn't say that, and we're going to move on. So, that is a really powerful feature that deserves to be pushed back in the level progression. I mean, look, if you're listening to this and you're a dungeon master and you've run for a druid, you know, okay? Like, I don't care if druid is your favorite class, that has broken a dungeon for you. That has ruined so many encounters by the fact that they turned into a worm and went under your door and looked around to see what all was on the other side of your ambush. And, you know, it's fine. It's rules as written. The druid in 5e has the ability to do that. But in 1D&D, we have the opportunity to correct that and reserve such a powerful ability for a little later in the game.
And you know what? Druids get Find Familiar at, what was it, 2nd level?
2nd level.
That playstyle is still partially enabled if you send your familiar in to do the scouting instead of yourself. It's not going to be quite as covert, and you are going to have to deal with some of the limitations of the familiar stat block as opposed to you being a druid. There's a lot more things that you can do if you decide to drop your form, but if you're just purely scouting, that is an option for you.
That's a very good point that I didn't think of.
And to additionally enable that, they did remove the range on your telepathy. So that familiar can run off into the wild blue yonder, and you can still know what to expect ahead. So it's not totally gone, but it is definitely changed.
The telepathy does have a range. It's 120 feet. Seeing through the eyes of your familiar doesn't have a range anymore.
Oh, yeah, you're right. Okay. Yeah, see, I spent the vast majority of my time with this playtest material looking over the paladin, and it might be showing.
Whiskey's good, though?
Whiskey's good, though.
Yeah, that's the thing. We normally enjoy some libation while we are recording these episodes, and this one has just gone on so long that it's starting to show. Okay, anyway, let's move on from there. We've covered Tiny Critter. We're nearly through the normal druid.
At 13th level, we are going to unlock alternating forms.
I like this one.
This is a weirdie but a goodie. Rob, go ahead and tell them what it does, since this is one of the ones that you like.
Okay, Druid players out there, how many times has this happened to you? You use your wild shape at a high level to access a place that you couldn't get to any other way. Let's say you flew up to a balcony, and then you saw a scene unfolding before you where you really just needed to cast Fireball, like right now. And so you would drop your wild shape, wait till your next turn, cast your Fireball, wait till your next turn back into the Peregrine Falcon or whatever you turned into to get up here, and would fly back. That is a lot of time and a lot of effort spent to be able to interact with a scene as yourself when you are already in wild shape. Here at 13th level, you will gain the opportunity in 1D&D to switch between your wild shape and your, normal shape and being your character back and forth as a mere bonus action for a minute without expending additional uses of your channel nature.
A couple of notes on alternating forms. Firstly, as long as you switch back and forth within the next minute, you can do this as many times as you want. That's a good thing. The downside is that this does not do what I originally assumed and allow you to alternate amongst forms of your wild shape. It does not allow you to switch from an animal of the land to an animal of the sea or an animal of the sky. Additionally, it does not allow you to change forms within the type that you have selected. So you could not change from animal of the land A to animal of the land B. You are simply turning back into your normal druidic form and then back into the wild shape that you had previously assumed using this use of channel nature. With all those qualifications said, yes, this is actually quite good, because we've been talking about how your normal druid form will, in many situations, be more useful than your wild shape. The ability to be able to revert back and forth between those will actually make it a lot more appealing to use the wild shape feature, because at the drop of a hat as a bonus action on your turn, you can revert back to your normal druidic form. I kind of wish this was earlier because of how useful I see the ability to turn back into my normal self, but I'm very glad that it is included.
I am imagining a scene where there's a ritual taking place around the Wand of Orcus, and I swoop in as an animal of the land. I'm a cheetah. I run in. I grab that thing. I revert into my normal form and then change back into my wild shape with a bonus action on my next turn. And all of a sudden, that thing that I'm holding is now incorporated into my wild shape. No one can run up and grab it from me. It's not in my mouth. It's not accessible. It's now inside of me somewhere.
Oh, that's just gross.
You don't know where.
That's just gross. I mean, not like disgusting, but it's like, I mean, it's kind of disgusting from like a gameplay perspective. You know, you have to die in order for them to reclaim the thing.
It's magically incorporated into my body, Steven.
I don't like that.
I agree. 13th level feels late for this. But it didn't exist in 5e. You had to burn uses of your wild shape every time you wanted to do anything as a bipedal humanoid with opposable thumbs. So I dig this.
Yeah, it's good. I want it earlier. It's good. That's probably why I want it earlier. Okay, moving on to 15th level, which is the next wild shape modifying feature that we get. It's called Wild Resurgence, and it states that when you use your wild shape, you will get to use the Healing Blossoms feature as part of that same channel nature. Hey, you remember Healing Blossoms? We probably talked about it like somewhere around an hour to an hour and a half ago or something like that. It was the other thing, one of the two other things that you could do with your channel nature. And we said, hey, this thing's really cool at early levels, but you're probably never going to use it at higher level because it doesn't get any better. I was right. It doesn't get any better. But when you get to use it for free, when you use wild shape, that makes it a good bit more appealing. And honestly, it makes using your wild shape a little bit more appealing, because it's not like you get to wild shape for free when you use Wild Companion, or you don't get to get Wild Companion for free when you use wild shape. But the fact that you get to do two things at the same time for the same resource makes the secondary option that you're getting for free highly appreciated, and it makes you using option A, the thing that's allowing you to do that, a little bit more appealing.
I agree with all of that. You remember when we first addressed this and you were complaining about it falling off at later levels? I said, well, wait till we get to level 15. This is why. It does not get any better over the course of that time. But here's the thing. You have that channel nature ability, and clearly, as we have now kind of proven without the Circle of the Moon, you're not going to be using Wild Shape as your channel nature feature in combat. It's nice to have the option to have something that still matters in a combat scenario, like area of effect healing. So maybe you're using that more than we thought you were using that all this time, especially as you're saving spell slots and looking to fill more of a utility and support role in the party. Now, though, when you are able to take a wild shape and do some area of effect healing, that is a valuable commodity. Is it the greatest thing since sliced bread at 15th level? No. But when you're here talking about 8th level spells, being able to do any 2 things at once, and neither of these things are bad things, right? Like, they're both good, useful things that have a function in exploration and in traversal and in combat. Maybe not the best thing you can do in combat, but still, any doing 2 things at once, like you said, has innate value. You are beating the action economy at 15th level.
You know what? While you're talking about this, I think I figured out what I want. In order to make the Druid feel like they are not just entirely wrapped up in their wild shape, what if, as we progressed, Healing Blossoms also improved?
I mean, that would help. Going from D4s to 6s or 8s.
Maybe, yeah. I mean, it could scale, or you could just add a different feature. You know, maybe it also hurts people who are within the spectral field.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe you could do either or. Like, you could choose to do damage or heal. Or it could be like that Wither and Bloom spell where you get to do both. Or maybe the people inside get a bonus to their movement speed or something, you know. Just like add a little bit of versatility in a non-wild shape based area of the Druid. I think that's what I want. Even if they left wild shape unchanged, that would make me feel better and more excited to play the class.
I like that thought very much. I like options, and the Druid is the utility guy. The Druid it should be, and still can be, kind of a Swiss Army knife. They just don't have to be the Swiss Army knife of just combat.
You know what? That's what they've been doing with the rest of this playtest material that we've been presented with over the last several months, is they've been giving us more options. And now, suddenly, here comes the Druid, and we get just Wild Shape. And the Wild Shape has less options than it used to. They're standardizing it.
I'm sorry, Steve. The options that you're getting is that you can look like anything you want now. We're not controlling what you can and can't turn into. You want to be a cheetah with leopard spots instead of cheetah spots? I know most people can't tell the difference, but we'll know.
I'm trying to let you finish what you're saying. I can't really stop you from talking. I mean, I could just like hang up on the call. I considered punching you, but then I'd just be breaking my monitor. I didn't like that. I know it was a bit, but I didn't like it. That is not an acceptable substitution for mechanics.
But look, you are correct in saying that. Jay Craw, in the interviews that you continually reference in these episodes, is talking about all the options now afforded to Druids.
Where are they?
But it is the illusion of options. It is all flavor. It is all stuff that good dungeon masters would allow their players to do anyway. I won't soapbox there, but yeah, you're right. You know what? Let's get off of that. Let's move from 15th level.
I turned my fan on for a minute. I've literally cooled down. We're moving on to 17th level, where you get beast spells. This is the first of the options that I think is actually really good. I mean, I know alternating forms is like, alternating forms feels like that should have already been there.
That was a step in the right direction.
That makes wild shape like kind of decent, but beast spells at 17th level finally makes it borderline good.
It actually makes alternating forms kind of useless in retrospect.
Yeah, actually, kinda, yeah. Okay, so Beast Spells works very similarly to the way that it did in 5th edition. You used to get it at 18th level. Here now you get it at 17th. It allows you to cast spells while wild-shaped. Pause for effect.
I was about to say, imagine the Aliens guy meme. Oh, God, the Aliens guy meme has got to be so old now. Look up what the Aliens guy meme is, and then imagine spells. Okay, done.
Maybe if you could also imagine like a meerkat doing the aliens guy meme, because, because that's you now. In addition to being able to cast spells in any wild shape form in which you would like to find yourself, you also get the added bonus of not having to provide material components. Normally you would have to present an object or at least present your druidic focus when casting these spells. But as long as the material component doesn't have a cost and is not consumed in the casting, it is irrelevant while you're in your wild shape.
You also don't have to perform somatic or verbal components. Don't know if you said that. I didn't hear it.
I didn't, actually. And this is the part where I said that could come in pretty handy, because if no one knows that you're casting a spell, how are they supposed to counterspell it? Who's going to counterspell the rat on the table?
Who's going to expect the rat?
Did we both think of rats independently?
The rat lets out a little fart, and all of a sudden there's fire in the room. I didn't see it coming. I never expected burning hands to come from tiny paws. No, this is sincerely a huge step for the druid. At 17th level, you've unlocked the highest level spells in the game. And now, it doesn't matter what form you are in, yourself or any of your 3 flavors of wild shape, you can cast them, with very small exception. This is kind of a cobbled together combo of 18th and 20th level class features. There's a bit of Archdruid in here, and there's also a bit of the old 18th level Beast Spells feature. Either way, you're getting both of those sooner, which is, kind of the theme for 1D&D. You're getting access to formerly capstone abilities at earlier levels. So this is good. It took us till 17th level to get here, but man, that one's solid.
I think that were I to play a druid, 17th level would be where I called it quits. If I had the ability to become a 20th level druid, I would probably just multiclass those last 3 levels. I would at least have to stop and look at my different multiclass options, because, as cool as it would be to get an extra feat, extra ASI, and an epic boon, there might be a little bit more benefit to be found along the way. But, the fact that wild shape doesn't allow you to keep your racial or class features, including those that you've multiclassed to get,
it cramps my style, man.
I might have to take it back. It supremely disincentivizes you from multiclassing, because you lose all of that crap when you're wild shaped. Never mind, maybe Druid's the class you take all the way. Every time.
17th does feel like peak Druid, I'll admit. There's not a lot to tempt you beyond then.
Yeah, well, 18th level is quite disappointing, really. But, hey, feats, ability score increases, and epic boons, those might be worth the wait now.
All right, at long last, that is the end of explaining how wild shape affects your basic Druid. That is a lot. That, again, we've said it so many times going through here, and we're certainly repeating ourselves at this point, but it bears saying, if you're not wild shaping, according to 1D&D, you're not playing a druid.
Or certainly, why are you playing a druid?
Yeah, so, on the other hand, though, if you want to double down, if you want to be the, as Steve put it, the druidiest druid.
That's hard to say. It feels wrong.
It does. And if you want to have your wild ship finally have some combat applications, there's a subclass for you, and it's currently the only one we've got. Circle of the Moon, inspired by lycanthropic mythos, allows you to be more effective with your wild shapes. So let's rewind back to 3rd level and see what this subclass offers us. And the very first thing is literally called Combat Wild Shape.
Well, they really hit the nail on the head with that one.
Which, by the law of omission, tells us that without this Circle of the Moon, Wild Shape is not meant for combat.
They could have just called it non-combat Wild Shape. Anyway, let's go ahead and talk about the things that Combat Wild Shape grants you access to. Starting with the simplest first, you get the Quick Attack trait, which says that you can use an unarmed strike as a bonus action while you are in your wild shape. Now, notice that it doesn't say Bestial Strike, which is the one that you would automatically get from your Animal of the Land, which is, the only one that you have at this level. It specifically mentions that it's an unarmed strike. That is going to deal a lot less damage, but it does open up the option for you to do things like shove, or grapple your target, and those can be pretty useful. So while I will likely miss the damage that I would have gotten as a Bestial Strike, I think I'm actually happier with it staying Unarmed Strike currently. A lot of that is wrapped up in however they decide to handle grappling and shoving rules, though.
Let's note that you can do this as a bonus action, which you are going to be able, thanks to the next feature, Swift Transformation, to be able to take your wild shape form as a bonus action instead of as a magic action, like every other kind of druid. So you're not going to be able to take advantage of that unarmed strike on the first turn that you take the form. But let's also recall that your unarmed strike is based off of your strength modifier, which, with the new version of the druid, is now based on your wisdom modifier. So it will be dealing a little bit more damage than potentially before.
You actually can transform using your action. It's because it's an either or.
Yeah, but you're not going to do that to get an unarmed strike. You're not.
Yeah. I mean, if it's the only attack you can make, I mean, maybe.
It's not the only attack you can make.
But what it would be better to do is to, like, say, cast a spell, like a concentration spell especially, using your action and then transform as a bonus action. Maintain concentration on that spell while you're in your wild shape, and then on your next turn you can walk up, use your action to attack with bestial strikes, and then your bonus action to attack with unarmed strike. That would be, I think, probably the optimal way to do things.
All of that is correct, and also does not discount the fact that you are not using your action to wild shape ever once you take Moon Druid.
It is an admittedly markedly better option. I mean, I think that feature alone is why so many 5e Druids are Circle of the Moon Druids. All the other stuff on top of that you get is just kind of like icing on the cake. The one that I would be the most excited about, though, and I'm probably in the minority here, is the fact that if you take Circle of the Moon and gain access to combat wild shape, you gain the ability to cast abjuration spells while in your wild shape immediately at level 3. You do not have to wait until 17th level to be able to do it. Granted, that 17th level feature beast spells is way better than this, but just the fact that you have the ability to cast some spells in your wild shape at level 3 is key.
Now, if you are accustomed to 5th edition and haven't been listening to previous episodes of this podcast, you may not realize that abjuration spells covers most of your healing spells now. So you are going to be able to cast curing magic on yourself and keep yourself in the fight longer while you are in your wild shape if you are a Circle of the Moon Druid. It also covers defensive buff spells and temporary hit point granting spells. You are going to be a support caster while you are in your wild shape with this subclass, which, gotta say, is pretty appealing. Those are the kinds of spells that I would want to cast, and you've got some decent ones unlocked at early levels by the time you get here at level 3.
You know, ironically, I think that probably a support druid is the one that would appeal to me more. And it's funny that you have to take the combat wild shape subclass to be a better support druid. Yes. By the way, you know, just so anyone doesn't think that we missed it, there is some debate going on right now about whether or not you actually can cast any abjuration spells using this feature, because rules as written, you're losing the class feature spell casting when you take your wild shape. We note that, and we believe that this is worded in such a way where it would specifically overrule that, even though it is also worded in such a way that, you know, I guess some people are interpreting that. Obviously, that is not the intent. When we get the final version of it, I'm sure that they will clear that up. But I think that there is support, even with the way that it is currently worded, to say that, you know, the feature is not broken.
It's functional.
It is functional.
The rule is a rule until there's an exception, and this is obviously an exception, even if it's not worded as perfectly as some people would like.
Yeah.
It's also worth noting that the old version of Combat Wild Shape did come with the ability to spend spell slots to heal yourself, but that was all it could do. Abjuration magic covers more bases than that. So this is actually opening a door that was already open much wider.
And I'm struggling to think of it like just offhand, but if there was a way for you to gain access to some higher level abjuration magics, like, say, Counterspell, that would be a pretty dope thing to do as a puppy.
Oh dear. I mean, most things are pretty cool things to do as a puppy.
The next level where you get a subclass feature is going to come in at 6th level. And this is known as Elemental Wild Shape. I like how they keep all of the names from their 5th edition counterparts and just change everything about them. But this is the feature that used to come in at 10th level and gave the Circle of the Moon Druids the ability to transform into literal elementals. No longer were they limited to just beast stat blocks. You could be an air, earth, fire, or water elemental with all of the advantages that came with it.
And what is 1D&D's answer to such a feat? Coming in 4 levels earlier? Well, I'll tell you. Basically, you get to choose acid, cold, fire, lightning, or thunder, one of those particular 5 elemental damage types, and when you take your wild shape, you get resistance to that chosen damage type, which can be different every time you use your channel nature to use this ability. And not only do you have that resistance, but your bestial strike, while in that form, can deal that damage type rather than its normal damage type, if you wish, and you can make that decision every time you hit. This is not bonus damage. This is different damage.
This is new, by the way. I mean, I know it's using an old name, but it is giving you something completely new here. The old 6th level Circle of the Moon feature was called Primal Strike, and it allowed your Wild Shape's attacks to count as magical for the purposes of overcoming resistances or immunity to non-magical attacks and damage. This is taking a different approach by giving you the ability to just replace the damage type out and out. That can be useful because overcoming a resistance or an immunity is great, but it is incapable of finding a vulnerability, which is a thing that you would have access to. Also, it gives you the ability to be part of the conversation when it comes to stopping that troll from regenerating, because now you can deal fire damage.
Yeah, and that was kind of the example that was running through my head is, I'm going to turn my bird into a fire bird. I will be a phoenix.
See, I went to Thunderbird, yeah.
Well, sure. When I attack, I will deal fire damage. And when I'm up against a troll, that's going to be great, because now it can't heal. When I'm up against a plant-type creature, that's going to be great, because I'm going to be able to do double damage to its fire vulnerability. But if I'm up against fire elemental or certain demons, I'm going to be dealing not even as much damage as I was going to be doing if I just dealt regular bludgeoning, piercing, or slashing damage.
Right.
Maybe no damage if they're immune to the damage type. So it's kind of a two-edged sword. There are going to be situations where it's obviously going to be better to just overcome resistances and immunities. And there are going to be situations where you're going to be happy to be able to deal a particular damage type. So the ability to choose before hitting with each attack is, I'm not even going to say it's nice, it's kind of necessary.
Well, I think that the ability to overcome the resistances and immunities is going to be more useful almost all of the time because vulnerabilities are so rare. And you're more likely to pick a damage type that is going to run you into a resistance than one that is going to find a vulnerability. Also, when you choose to wild shape, you're going to have to go ahead and make that selection. That selection is going to stick with you the entire time you're transformed. You can choose to switch back to basic physical damage, but it's not like you can switch from thunder to fire and back again, which means that you might find yourself in a combat where you're stuck dealing a type of damage that they're immune to, and your fallback is a damage that they're resistant to. So I'm going to go ahead and tell you, in case you missed the episodes that we did talking about the different magical damage types and how often monsters are resistant or immune to them, by default, you're probably going to want to go Thunderbird, not Firebird, because out of all of these different types, it is the least resisted, least immune.
Check out that damage types episode, especially if you love Steve bringing facts and figures about the game as a whole to the table, because we let him off the leash for that one, and I genuinely learned some stuff, and I've been playing this game for years.
If there was a reason for you not to just go with thunder damage every time by default, it is the fact that you also get resistance to that type of damage. And honestly, I think that should be a bigger factor. You should choose the damage type based not on the type of damage that you want to deal, but probably more on the type of damage that you want to be resistant to, because that is a lot easier sort of thing to predict and plan for.
Just use your wild shape as a weak form of absorb elements.
Yeah, well, as a ongoing form of absorb elements that, doesn't cost you any additional resources. That, like, gaining resistances is, it's not fun, but it's really good. Like, I'm excited about it whenever it happens to me. I tend to pick races and subclasses that give me damage resistances, and then I just find places to make that relevant.
Well, let's talk about things that are fun and that you might enjoy. When you get to 10th level as the Circle of the Moon, you gain Elemental Strikes. So now, not only do you have the option to do elemental damage when you use your Bestial Strike, but you get to deal extra damage of that same type that you chose with that feature when you hit with your Bestial Strike, to the tune of an extra D6. So if you're an animal of the land, you're dealing a D8 plus 6 for both of your Bestial Strikes of that chosen damage type. If you are an animal of the sea, you have literally doubled your damage. And if you are the sad, sad little animal of the sky, your 1d4 plus wisdom is increased by a whole d6. You've practically doubled your damage output. And it's going to increase to 2d6 at 17th level.
I'm sitting here trying to decide whether you thought that the part of this that I would be excited about was rolling extra dice or doing more math. Either way, probably the answer is true. So you're right. This says that it is an extra d6 whenever you attack with your Bestial Strike, but by 10th level, you've already unlocked the multi-attack. So it's always going to be a potential extra 2d6, and when you get to 17th level, it's an extra potential 4d6 per turn. And this is where we really start to feel like Wild Shape is fully combat capable. This is pretty much as strong as Wild Shape can possibly get, at least from like a damage perspective, until you unlock the ability to cast spells while in it. And that doesn't come for a full 7 more levels.
And remember, you're benefiting from everything you had up till now when you get here. You're still able to cast your protective buffs and your spells. You're still able to have resistance and deal a different type of damage while you're dealing extra damage, probably twice per turn, assuming that you're hitting and you've kept that wisdom score high to increase your spell attack bonus. This, at 10th level, I'm still thinking about Elemental Wild Shape from 5th edition, being able to turn into an actual air elemental, as opposed to this. And at some level, I think I would still rather turn into an air elemental.
Yeah, you should.
But when you take the ability to cast spells, the quick attack, taking your form as a bonus action, being able to choose your damage type as you go, it feels fairer. And air elementals can fly, and I can too, depending on which form I took. I could be in this form with a swim speed. I could be in this form with a climb speed. I could be in this form with a fly speed. I could be in this form with dark vision of 120 feet. There are elements of this that the old Elemental Wild Shape didn't offer me.
Yeah, I did a quick damage comparison, and at the level where you unlock this feature, the standard elementals from 5th edition are just empirically better. You end up recovering some of that ground based on some of these other options, but those elementals were fast, and they had some hit points, and they could do some damage, and the damage that they could deal had like lingering effect. Like if you were a fire elemental, you could set someone on fire, and that would have lingering effects that moved on into the next round. So yeah, I mean, it's not as good, but I mean, it's good. It's giving you some extra damage. It's making it to where using Bestial Strikes is a pretty viable option.
And this is the first class, genuinely, that we have gone through where when I feel that something is not as good as its 5th edition counterpart, that feels appropriate.
Yeah. And so as we wrap up here, because, again, the last Circle of the Moon feature is in here at 14th level. It's 1,000 forms. It's the thing that lets you use Alter Self a bunch. We already covered it earlier because it had nothing to do with Wild Shape. As we wrap up the Druid class here, I want to reiterate that we understand that rebalancing was necessary.
Yes.
And honestly, we were talking about it a little bit before the episode. This One D&D Druid feels so nerfed from the 5th edition counterpart. But you know what it feels pretty on par with? The One D&D Cleric.
Yeah, and that's what's really important here. We're comparing and contrasting 5th edition to One D&D because that's fun and that's interesting and it's useful to see where the game is progressing. But in terms of power scaling, it doesn't matter if the Druid is as powerful as the 5th edition Druid, and I think that's forgotten many times by people on the internet. What matters is how does the Druid, a full-classed caster, compare to the only other full-classed caster that we have in the Cleric. Granted, the Bard is kind of its own thing, but also has a lot of spells. But there are limits on the Bard that aren't placed upon the Druid and the Cleric, and nothing from a spellcasting standpoint has been taken away from the Druid in an appreciable way. They are still the primal caster nukes that they were always meant to be. And their spell list really hasn't changed all that much. They're still going to be as powerful as they were in 5th edition from that aspect. The thing that really broke the Druid in 5e was, I will say, the mishandling of the wild shape feature. They have reined it in. Did they rein it in too far? Maybe, maybe not. But it feels comparable compared to the Cleric that came out in the last UA. And at the end of the day, that is kind of what we're going for.
I mean, as we look across all the other classes, I still definitely feel like Rangers and Bards are kind of just running away with it right now.
Expert life.
But comparing Fullcaster A to Fullcaster B and Fullcaster C, it's still Bards. It's Bards all the way. But, B and C feel pretty similar. So that's good, I guess.
Here at the end of discussing and learning everything that we can about the 1D&D Druid in their, let's face it, it's still their first iteration, I am not necessarily excited to play a 1D&D Druid, but in all fairness, I wasn't all that excited to play a 5th edition Druid, and for many of the same reasons. But one of the reasons that I didn't want to play the 5th edition Druid was because I viewed it as overpowered, and I wasn't excited to run 4 5th edition Druids again because I consider them overpowered and I consider them more difficult to balance encounters for to make them interesting. I am more excited to run for this version of a Druid than I ever was for anything in 5e. And, at the end of the day, that says something about them moving in the right direction.
Look at the new delicious vulnerable Druids. Delectable. I can't wait to run for one.
Why does you calling a Druid vulnerable make me so uncomfortable?
Well, they literally are, empirically vulnerable compared to their...
Look at them, with all of their fleshy bits exposed.
Oh, so, listeners, what do you think about the 1D&D Druid? Did it go too far? Did it not go far enough? How much did you play Druids in 5th edition? What excited you about them? Is that still here in 1D&D? If not, have you found something new to be excited about? Rob and I only had a couple of recommended changes for how we felt some of the problems that we perceived could be addressed. What are your ideas? I still haven't filled out my survey on the D&D Beyond website, so there is still time for you to sway me with your opinions so that I can recommend a better way to do things, your better way to do things. Come on to our Discord, share your opinions with me, inform me of a better way to do this, and then let's push for it together. Link, as usual, in the description.
When you hear from us again, we will be done with Druids and pressing on to Paladins. Talking about those sexy smiters of fiends and foes, and really letting Steve run with a class that he has been playing for years and has loved. And we'll see how he feels about them at the end of this new playtest. So, don't forget to tune in to our next episode of Bardic Twinspiration.
Deus Vult! is the tasty whiskey.
Very similarly, in a Mike way to seeing me sip Woodford out of the bottle, seeing you drink Penelope out of the bottle is very cowboy. Good for you.
Penelope is a whiskey, by the way. It is.
Yes.
It is not a euphemism.
Just in case. I could have just called it P. You're sipping P out of the bottle.
I mean, that is the biggest letter on the bottle.
Shorten that for posterity, which is also P, which is halved, which means I can deal half of a D8 plus half of my wisdom modifier on a bee sting to somebody, which I find is very...
Heck no, you can't.
On a spider bite.
Heck no, a bee sting is going to be
which
nothing.
I feel is hilarious.
Bee sting is going to be nothing because it's a flying
All right, it's a bee
one.
without its wings. It's a queen. Screw you. He says, scrolling back up to the top.
That the part of this that I would be excited about was rolling extra rolling extra dice.
Let's kill it. What was it, 3.5 hours? Damn. Me.